Just waiting on Umair. Can you guys hear me? Walaikum salam. Ali, man, your Clubhouse. I'll tell you what, man, it's been killing it. I thought Clubhouse was dead, and I just, what was I gonna say? I thought it was dead. Checked today when I was at the gym because I was looking for something to work out to, and I came across some old recordings. So Umair is trying to figure out IG Live for the first time. So I just talked to him on the phone. I told him he's got to click on my thing. So as soon as he jumps on, I think I was gonna try to do this from my computer, but yeah. I wonder if I can text him from my watch. Are you there? How do I do this? Are you there? All right, do you see me? Okay, you need to join the live. You need to join my live, and then I'll see you pop up. Yeah, I'm repping your city too, the old Kingdom. But I don't know how long you lived in Seattle. He texted me. I'm trying. All right. Let me add him. He joined. So how do I now? Okay, so there. View request. Boom.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I was worried about your Wi-Fi connection, I guess, at your cousin's house. Is it good? Or
Yeah, it's
whatever
good.
you're on?
I'm using LTE right now.
Okay, nice. Cool. So basically, the first time you're doing this, we have like an hour cutoff. We can't go rambling on like our normal podcast, right?
No, 100%.
So you know what I'm saying?
It's late, man. 9:24.
Yep. I already prayed Isha, so I can like knock out after this. But I really want to like. I know we had talked a couple weeks ago. I think ideally we were trying to do something with you and Ubaydullah Evans. But trying to track both of you guys together at the same time is like hard, right? But I think there's this concept around sartorialism and spirituality. So I was hoping you could first of all define some terms for us, and just talk to me about what is, when you hear about sartorial, what does that mean to you? Because it has a certain vision in my head, but I want to get your take.
All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Salatu wassalam ala khayr mab'uth rahmatul alamin. I think there's I think there's a lot to this. Is that first, like, we think about clothing when you think about sartorial, right?
Yep.
We think about more of things that happen to do with presentation and clothing, but specifically a certain type of lifestyle or a presentation that you're involved with, that's deeply rooted in a cultured form of like expression, specifically around clothing. You know what I mean? Like there is sort of, so like you have sartorial, a traditional sartorial clothing, right? Or you have something that we would sort of call sunnah sartorial. So like there is a sartoriality in the way we try to present ourselves Islamically, but then there is like a very deep culturally rooted uh, sort of pulse that, or you have sort of your finger and your roots of that are firmly planted on which place that you hail from, and specifically in the dress and the presentation and the clothing and the accessories of that place. And usually I think sometimes nowadays it gets it gets mixed in with sort of bespoke culture, right? Like sartorial
Mm-hmm.
bespoke culture. But there is sort of a formal
Bescope is kind of like it's kind of like, for layman's terms, is it like it's custom but not quite, right? It's a little bit, it's a higher degree. It's like, is that where something's made to exactly fit your body type? It's molded for you.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily custom. It's so bespoke. Custom is like you'll be given, if you're given a suit, you're given a thing of clothing, and you take that thing that you've already aware that is like you've already seen it, and you customize it to your body shape. Bespoke is
Sure.
starting from scratch.
Right. Okay. I
Yeah.
got you. So, yeah, because when I think about sartorial, what that means, like I always think it's always um, like you think about men, like, and I have no knowledge of women's fashion. I don't know if sartorial is related to only menswear, but I always
Mhm.
think about it as menswear, like traditional menswear. I don't think, even though I do like streetwear, um, I don't like, for me, streetwear, I don't know if maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think of streetwear sartorial. Sartorial is like, your classic menswear, maybe like Ivy style, but that might be pushing it. But I'm looking at more the elegant, look, suits, tweed blazers, that kind of, very traditional attire. I don't know if that's something, because you mentioned something about almost like a Islamic sartorialism, like something from the East, um, and which I wasn't aware of. You know what I'm saying? Like, as far as I always thought sartorialism itself was is a modern English term, like from, I guess, England, America, etc.
Okay, what's your question?
So, like, because you met your question is like, I wanted to understand go at a little bit what you mean by this Islamic sartorial.
Yeah. I mean, no. So I'm not. I said semi-sartorial.
Sartorial, sorry.
Sartorial. So there is. I'm not trying to make this sort of a totally just to say that there is like an Islamic code of dress that we're talking about. We're talking about that. But there is definitely sort of this, you know. I think as Muslims, we've always had a very fascinating. We've had a fascinating relationship with clothing. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Yeah.
There's always been this sort of interesting bravado in the way Muslims have carried themselves and presented clothes and also like invented clothes. Like many of the tribes, if you look at when Islam comes into the subcontinent, right? Many of the tribes didn't wear clothes, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, being indigenous communities, they didn't wear clothes. And the vast majority of clothing that you see present in the subcontinent that transcends religion is specifically introduced to that space vis-a-vis Islam. Let me give you an example. That if you look at like Hindus in South India, they wear uh, a silwar, right? And they wear a silwar and they wear a shawl on the right side of their shoulder, right?
Okay.
Where do you think they got it from? The proof is sort of in the pudding because Islam's initial da'wah comes to before like the Mughal Empire comes. It comes during the time of the Prophet vis-a-vis Yemen,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's why like that whole sort of south area was traditionally following the Shafi'i school. They were not a Hanafi, right? And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at many of their clothing, it's
Okay.
Moti. And if you
Mm-hmm.
look at like people that are in these major cities in South India, if you ask them where they're from, they will tell you they're Hadramoti, right?
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there's a
Okay.
very specific town um, in southeast India that is named after Hadramaut,
Right.
right? Because of the diaspora. And now what happens is that even clothing that goes beyond necessarily like clothing that they introduce goes beyond religion and actually becomes, it sort of seeps into becoming something that's just simply South Indian clothing, right? So even Hindus began to wear very similar clothing. That's the same thing with like how the women cover their head. So and then you look at the West, like the Maghrib, or you look at Persia and other places, like the way, and especially Ethiopia, because we know that Ethiopia had the best clothes, right?
Right.
And the Prophet ﷺ, he looked the best in his Ethiopian outfit, which was a red striped black jubba that he wore that was from Ethiopia. So there was always this like eclectic reinvention and invention of clothing, specifically clothing, libas, right? Let me give you an example. It's very interesting if you go, from a Quranic framework, when Allah says, Ya ayyuhal muzammil, qum fa'anzir, that covered one, go and like like make the call of Islam, like qum fa'anzir, go stand up and publicize the religion. And then he says, وَرَبُّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, and praise your Lord, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, and then purify your clothing, right? Purify your clothing, right? Like, why does he? So it was, if you look even in the Quranic framework and the framework of like the Sunnah of the Prophet, and then how the companions sort of approached, like they had a very a likening, so to speak, with clothing, especially urban people. Bedouins did not. Bedouins generally did not. That they had a completely different engagement with clothing, because clothing was utilitarian, not, it wasn't necessarily a statement of culture, right? So you sort of see that, and then I think what happens is as time moves on, you see that there is a territorial nature between like people. I'll give you an example. When you go to Morocco or other places, when I lived in Morocco, and if you wanted to buy like a jalabiya, right? And I think you've been to the same souk, right? In Fez?
Right.
If you want to buy jalabiya, your price would depend on if it's handmade or machine made. And anybody that is Moroccan can tell you that their jalabiya is machine made. They can tell you by first look. And that was the price is not necessarily by the thobe itself. Like, it's not a brand. There's no brand. There's no brand. You're not wearing Gucci jalabiyas. You're not wearing like,
By the way, hey, do you have AirPods by any chance?
Why? Do you not hear me?
Your audio. If your AirPods are charged, I know you have AirPods. If they're charged, if you put them in, there'll be better audio.
Okay, I don't have AirPods anymore, but I don't have AirPods anymore.
You got rid of them, huh? Okay.
I got rid of them.
Whatever. That's a side conversation, but yeah. But anyway, yeah, it's a little choppy. I can make you out still. Yeah. Yes. So I hear you. I it's like there's definitely this. What you're saying is there's emphasis on clothing, as far as like it's a part of a person, right? So, but I'm curious to. I don't know if there's a point you want to wrap up here, because I'm curious about more of how you yourself personally have experienced this, especially living both, like you said, in Morocco, but also being like an American. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, but I want to wrap up your point if you were making one before I cut you off on the AirPods.
Yeah, I think my point was simply saying that there was an understanding over there of things that are done with ihsan, right?
Right.
Like this idea of things that are excellent, and it was and people knew that, and they had a natural inclination towards things that are.
His connection seems to be a little shoddy. Give him a minute. If anyone wants me to ask anything, I think somebody asked about is Gucci haram? Let's see here. Accept again. Oh, he left. Let me add him again. Accept.
Oh yeah, sorry, you froze for a second. I was saying that.
Oh yeah, you froze too. So I don't know on whose end it was. Okay.
There was a natural inclination towards like things that are ihsan centric, right? Like things that are quite frankly beautiful, and the way you presented yourself was like even if like you read Maliki fiqh, if you read Maliki fiqh and you talk about al-Khatib, the Jum'ah chapter on Jum'ah, it talks
Yeah.
about the Khatib and Ishtirat al-Khatib, the conditions of the Khatib. It's in Fiqh
Right.
al-Malik wa Adillatihi. And they have a chapter on like the recommended, yani al-istihbab, like things that are beloved, things that, and part of it is that Khatib should, in the urban setting, should wear presentable clothing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So one of the nuances that I just want to hit here, Mahin, if I may, is the nuance between presentable or good clothing, tasteful, and expensive clothing, right? Just because things are expensive does not mean that there's something that they're inherently beautiful,
Sure.
right? That there's a difference between those two things, and obviously these are subjective things, right? Like there's like you said, streetwear versus more classic formal, but
Right.
and so like me personally, I didn't know much. So my story is very simple. If I can just share this, like it's like a 2-minute story of like why my personal relationship is. I didn't really know, but I was a teenager, 19 years old, 18, 19 years old, overseas in Morocco. Um, didn't understand clothes. Like I was still a kid, you know what I'm saying? Like you just wore whatever, especially at that time. I think like for young people now, there's more of a movement behind like sort of a societal movement behind like the younger teenagers
Mm-hmm.
surround themselves like brand names, like which I'm not even familiar with, right? Like uh, OVO and this and that, whatever, sort of like
Okay.
branded thing, Supreme, right? Which was
Yeah.
there or whatever. Um, and so that was not really a thing when we were in for sure when I was in high school or whatever. So I wasn't aware of these things. I knew it was there. I just don't know if we had access to it. So I go overseas, and I remember I was in the Qarawiin, and I was in Fez, and I was going to Arabic class in school. So it was just a class on grammar. It wasn't a class on anything. It was a class on grammar, Arabic grammar, right? It was Ajrumiyah,
Right.
year one. And I'm sitting in this place, and I usually wore like a traditional garment, like I had like a jalabiyah that I sort of would don, and I would go to the class. And one day I was late. I was late to class, and I overslept a little bit, so I got up and I wore track pants and a t-shirt and like and like a pullover, and I ran the streets of Fez. I'm going to the whatever. Finally, I get to class. I'm sitting down, and I'm walking in, and the sheikh is like impeccable, like ironed, like not a single crease. Right, his kufi is like perfect. He smells amazing. It's the Arabic class, and there's like oud burning in the class.
Okay.
There's oud burning. There's oud like burning in the class. And Arabic class, bro. Like Arabic, like مفعول به منصوب مفعول معية, you know what I mean? All the, like that's it. That's the class. Oud
Okay.
burning. And I could see him teaching an hour, but he's like constantly sort of like looking at me. Like he'll teach and like look at me like by the side, look at me, whatever.
And real quick, what are the other students wearing?
Everybody was wearing either like a jilaba or a jubba, like a thobe, or like a very well ironed shirt, right? A Western ironed shirt too. That was also there.
Sure.
But it's well ironed. And the teacher after class looks at me and he says like, can you let the sheikh says, would you let your teacher take you out to breakfast, right? So we're going out for breakfast. I have whatever. So we went to like a little like small stall next to the Qaraween, and he starts telling me stories of the ones that preceded us in the haiba, or the reverence that they had for knowledge, the tawaqqur they had for knowledge, and seeing out that they would like present themselves in the most beautiful way when they were in gatherings of learning, right? Like they would burn, like Imam Malik would burn oud and wear his most beautiful, like wear a beautiful garment and wear like scent on his neck, and then he would narrate hadith, right? Or Imam Abu Hassan al-Shadili, who would present this when he would teach. His turban would be immaculate, without anything in it, without not a single like a stain on their clothes, and how like. But the whole time he's talking about this, I'm realizing like, wait a minute, he's telling me stories, but what is he really, what is he really doing here? He's telling me like, come to class with some level of, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like come to class with some. So I think that sort of changed my personal relationship with clothing ever since then. And I'm not saying it's like you have to wear identitarian Muslim clothing that is like, you have to wear a thobe or a kufi or whatever you want to wear. Is the idea of like just be very tasteful in how you present yourself, especially when you're around sacred spaces. So like the Jum'ah place is generally the place traditionally where, according to like rigorously authenticated hadith, believers would wear their most beautiful clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We present
Okay.
ourselves
Right.
way. Right? And the Prophet used to name his clothes. He used to name them. He used to name his, right? He used to make dua over his clothes. He would have specific clothing for Jum'ah and then for the two. So what does that mean? Is that like what does that mean? Right? Like what does all of that mean? So I think that there's a great deal of excellence when it comes to, or tastefulness or culture with all of that.
So when you come back to America, because a lot of times people who go overseas and study, they generally, they'll adopt you. You go to Morocco, you got the hooded Moroccan jalabia, the fez, the hat. People go to Saudi, and then they'll come back and they'll dress like how they dressed overseas, right? I remember, when was it? So in 2000, because before you left, I don't think I didn't notice you'd probably dress like the average 19-year-old, 18-year-old, right? I think I noticed that you kind of dressed a lot more elegantly when you returned. But what made you decide to like not just rocking the like, because you got my question. A lot of the people who studied overseas, they bring that the clothing from what they wore overseas, and they, not that there's anything wrong with it, but that's what they're always, that becomes their wardrobe. They just bring it back over here, and whenever you see them, they're in a thobe or a jubba or whatever you call it, right?
So the question is why?
Yeah, what made you like you kind like, I've seen you in a thobe in America, but again, it seems to be like, I think the first time was at like, one of the first times I saw you was when you had just returned, and I saw you at the mosque, and then I saw you at the home of one of our elders. Actually, not my elder really, but your elder. You know what I'm saying? But like, yeah. But I think, but like, what gave you the wherewithal or conscientiousness to not just bring back all your jalabiyas and rock your jalabiyas all the time around here?
Well, two things. I think people should be allowed to wear whatever they want to wear, so it's not much of a like, it's not like a statement. If you want to wear Eastern clothing, Western, you should wear it. This is America, right? I mean, we got people driving, wearing buggies, and I mean, driving around in buggies in America. So in America, it's eclectic. You just were in Wicker Park, and what things you see in Wicker Park. You know what I mean? So
Right.
I don't think people should be able to, that doesn't make any. That's not. For me, I don't think that makes you any less.
Hey, your audio has got really low.
Sorry, that doesn't make you any less. Like that doesn't make you any less, what people like to use this word, like socially relevant by your clothing, right? Like I've seen scholars that are the most Eastern dressing scholars in the world. In like, for example, I was with in Granada with Murabit al-Hajj's son, Sheikh Abdurrahman, and he wears Mauritanian clothes, and that people love him, and he doesn't speak English, he doesn't speak Spanish, but everybody loves him there. Sheikh Mohammed in the south side of Chicago, same thing, right? Hafizullah, like the whole community loves him, like everybody loves him. So that's one thing that I think it's deeper than that. But the second, I think it's just being okay with being yourself for a bit. That's the first thing.
So real quick, you would say your personal, I want to dig in this a little bit, because listen, you like, I'll be real. A lot of what you said is a lot of generalities, but like people, the reason I'm bringing this up, because a couple months ago we were having a conversation, and we were having a conversation, and you were telling me, I guess you told me this because I could relate to you, but you were saying some of our boys were giving you a hard time because you wore like a safari jacket to Juma, and they called you a leprechaun. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, yeah. They don't know what they're
Yeah,
talking about, though.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
But I'm saying like I need to understand. I want people. I want to like explore a little bit more about your own like because you go from an 18-year-old kid in America wearing what an 18-year-old kid wears. You go to Morocco to study, and you're there for what 7 8 years or whatever it was, right? You come back in your mid to late 20s, and now you're generally your day to day. If I see you out, you're always going to be, I would say, dressed fairly elegantly. I would,
Mm.
that's how I would design it. So, what made you what was your inspiration? Because most guys, even their mid to late 20s, like you, in your late 20s, like you are not necessarily like, bro. I just hit 40, and I'm still like there's still a part of me that I'm not letting go of like streetwear and that kind of thing. Yeah, I like the elegant stuff, but it's like, but for you, I feel like that's all. Like when you were back, if you weren't wearing a jalabia, I think your setup, or you weren't playing basketball, your getup was gonna be like something like an elegant, like a blazer, a sport coat with dress slacks and that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? You wouldn't see ripped jeans or
Mm.
sweatpants, that kind of thing. So what inspired you to like dress that way, like upon your return to America? Because it seems like it was very seamless. It didn't seem like there
Okay.
was any like type of you weren't like trying to figure things out. You just like boom. There was like 18-year-old Umair, just like every 18-year-old, goes to Morocco. You probably weren't jalabia most of the time. You come back and boom, now you're like, dressed to the nines. That's how I saw it, at least. So
Okay.
take me through
Okay.
that process.
I know what you're saying. So there are two things. There are two pro. A is that, again, is that I think one of the things I learned was not necessarily to have a marriage with a specific type of clothing, but an understanding and a marriage with the idea of things that are elegant, things that are raqi, sophisticated clothing, right?
Yep. Okay.
Um, I always, when I was a kid, like, before that, and even at that time, like, I liked clothes. I just didn't know. I like, who doesn't like to present themselves nicely? Uh,
Correct.
but is the idea of like I didn't understand what that meant, and I didn't have to be honest, quite frankly, didn't have the access, or I couldn't afford things that I would think that were, I usually, for me, it was like, oh, everything's really expensive. You
Mm-hmm.
have to spend a lot of money to wear, right? Cat saw me in penny loafers once. It was like, man, those look expensive, and he was wearing like Jordan Space Jams. I was like, I don't know, what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But that's the way we think, right?
Yep.
Um, but I think the seamless thing is that, like, is the idea of like, I have a teacher that you met who passed away, Moul al-Hashim, rahmatullah alayh, one of the great friends of Allah and great people of God in Meknes, Morocco, inheritor of the great Sidi Muhammad ibn al-Habib. And he would present everything incredibly. You've been to his house, and
Right.
even at old age, I think one of the things you notice that he was a very beautiful man,
Right.
right? Both
Right.
inwardly and outwardly. And the way he presented food to his guests was also very beautiful. It was just everything. This is how the pens look, how the plates look, how the tea is served. All of that is part of the same conversation. It's not in a vacuum. It's
Right.
just all of that.
Yep.
Um, is and يا ابن آدم خذوا زينكم عند كل مسجد. Like, take all of your beauty to every mosque. Eat, drink, ولا تصرفوا, but don't go, beyond your means. Don't transgress. إن الله لا يحب المسرفين. God does not like the transgressors, right? And in another verse, like, like what beauty have you, what beauty have you prohibited from the servants of Allah? حرم الجماع, like you're making why are you preventing the beauty of Allah upon the servants of Allah? Allah says in the Quran that, like, that thing is real. Like, and a man came to the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he told him, the Prophet said, no, nobody enters paradise if they have مثقال ذرة كبر, they have like an atom's weight of arrogance in their heart. That's a hadith, and you've heard that hadith, we've all heard it. But the man
Sure.
responds, and he says, but Ya Rasulullah, a man loves, الرجل يحب اللباس الجميل ونعله الجميل. Like, he loves to have good clothes and good shoes, right, Mahin? He loves
Yep.
to have good shoes. And the Prophet says, he said, God is beautiful, وَيُحِبُّ جَمَال, and he loves beauty. Indeed, arrogance is بَطْرُ الْحَقِّ, is negating the truth and being ungrateful to people. That is arrogance, right?
Right.
That's what he's talking about. So, if it's an attempt of like, got, and I'll get to this to the point. So it was first and foremost like flipping right to what like how important beauty is. I saw a same picture of that sheikh recently, or no, a while ago when he was
Oh,
visiting Paris.
of Molay Hashim.
Amole Hashim.
Right.
Again, you've seen him, very traditional man, turban, or jalaba, very traditional. But he was visiting Paris once, and I saw him in a fedora and a three-piece suit and a handkerchief and a watch and loafers, right?
Mm.
And I was like,
Not on this live, but you got to show me that picture if you have access to it
"Oh, I'll
when
send it
we
to you."
meet. Okay, I won't share it, but yeah,
Yeah,
I'd
I'll
be
send.
interested
Yeah,
in seeing that.
it's a picture of him. Somebody taking a picture of him in the background is the Eiffel Tower, right?
Okay,
But
yeah,
he's in Paris, like he's a sheikh, like a traditional sheikh, right? And how many stories have we heard of this specific sheikh? Like, how many stories have you and I heard of this man, right? And the time we spent, like, just amazing person, from the lineage of the Prophet. So I said, and just and then I think that was like, wait a minute, but naturally somebody would say that and be like, well, that's a sheikh. Like, I don't get it. Like, I don't
right,
understand whatever. Like, it's the idea of like being yourself and knowing the time and the place that you live in and presenting something that is so beautiful that it attracts people to that thing. And I think it was just being very aware of the fact that like our Prophet ﷺ, when tribes would visit or he would visit a tribe, he would wear the clothing of the tribe that he's visiting, right?
right,
And when we say why my expression of it was really like I'm secure enough with my tradition that I don't see an identitarian expression of Islam vis-a-vis my clothing. That we're going to come to a time in this country where just covering your aura would be considered Islamic clothing.
uh
That's where we're headed. Just
right,
covering your aura would be considered an Islamic thing to do. Just covering your aura. Forget all the other things. Because you just see what people are, and this is the degradation, I would say, just of culture generally. Like, not even like this is just culture generally, and I don't want to be that guy, but it's like this sort of degradation of how we present ourselves. Of like people would not leave their homes at one point without making sure that they look presentable in this country.
right,
Forget in the East,
yep,
let alone. So there was this idea of just like not like schools had uniforms.
right,
Any school had a uniform. Work had a uniform, and I think it's good to be like. And I'm not like saying streetwear isn't good. I think that there's a space, and there is an art behind being, like creating and designing and creating an ensemble of streetwear. I think that's there's a very deep sense of sophistication that comes with that as well, and you know that as
right,
somebody who's a sneakerhead and somebody who has that relationship with streetwear. But I think you have a good balance between the two. I think you sell yourself short, but I think you have a good balance between those two, way better than I do. So it wasn't much of an issue because like my teachers never made it an issue, and there are
uh
spaces that like my heart's like, yeah, I want to wear a turban and I want to wear the clothes of my teachers today, and I just do it. But it's not to like reinforce some sense of security of like who I am. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
It's just like
How,
no.
how do you deal with, because of the culture is such that like you alluded to, that I was watching actually just before this call. I was eating dinner. I was watching this HBO documentary about Ralph Lauren,
Yeah.
right? And they kind of talk about something we know about, that every man, if you went to work, you wear a suit, no matter what. Like, no matter what profession you were in, there are probably different like variations of what the suit was, but you necessarily wouldn't be like, as a tailored bespoke suit. But everyone, that was kind of the uniform. And then casual dress became the thing, to the point where, to a detriment, I think, because yes, I agree that there is like, beauty and coolness in streetwear, right? Um, and I don't know if streetwear is at fault or casual wear is at fault, but in general, there's just been a it's a cultural shift of just being too. They say it's like a Silicon Valley thing of just being too laid back, where people will go. You like you said, you'll throw on a t-shirt and some sweatpants, right? To go to now, there are sweatpants now that are made for like going like more dressing up. You can have that, right? But we're talking about traditional, but because you can go to like Walmart, because people say, oh, to go grocery shopping, they're just gonna go and throw it whatever. Like there's zero coordination, and what the effect of that is that if you put on like, see, I'm wearing this jacket right here. It's called a Bedford jacket, right? This is not a blazer. You see, you want to say it has the lapel cut, but I'm wearing it under a hoodie with a baseball cap, right? I've worn this to work, and I tweeted about this, and it kind of like this is where we're at, and this is why you get comments like you do as well. I wore this to work, and people were like, "Hey, you're a little dressed up today." I'm like, dude, look at the fabric of this thing. You can tell it's like a military jacket. I'm like, dude, this is a military jacket, if you want to call it that. This ain't like a freaking blazer. And I think a lot of people, how did you overcome this idea? Because I'm sure you I don't know if you get any more because people understand that's how you dress, but probably when you first came back to America and you're you are at an event and you have a sport coat on or a blazer, right? People are like, hey, why are you dressed up? Like, you get my drift? And it's almost, you know what I'm saying? And so how do you react? And I think that's where it tells you how the culture is, because there's this whole balance of like, what's the cultural norm? Like the urf. You kind of alluded to it without saying the name, but the kind of urf. The normative culture now is that like what you had to officiate a marriage today, so you have a blazer on and a sweater, okay, right? But like you would also, if I invited you to my house, you might have that same thing on, right? There's nothing wrong with it. I wouldn't, but somebody might think, oh, that's a little too much or whatever, right? Or if I wear like a field jacket, I think I showed you, to work, and I wear it, and everyone's got a comment. Everyone's like, oh, I mean, they're complimentary, but it's just still like they make it a big deal, which tells you. And this is a corporate office, and I work for a multinational corporation, and you know what I'm saying. And people and that still gives you those vibes. That just tells you where we're at culturally. That people just are like, it's like super watered down. But I guess how did you deal with that? Because again, most people I think would be self-conscious and would be like, yeah, I don't want to. Because like to me. Like, I would like to wear a tie sometimes to work. I have stuff that I've gotten that are like, tailored and whatnot, right? I'd like to wear it to work, but I know they just wouldn't be like, well, maybe it's not appropriate. It's almost inappropriate because if the divisional vice president isn't wearing a suit and tie all the time, and if I wear it on a blue, it's already looked at like, this is too much. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just a difficult one because there is a sense of like being too, like, I'll put it, I think this way. I think Frank Lloyd Wright, he was known to say that dressing well for people is good manners.
Right.
When I present myself to you in a good way, it's good adab towards you. It's just good manners, because it means that you're important and loved in my life. That when you invite me to your home for dinner, right, I'm gonna wear something that's decent because that's what you mean to me, right? If I showed up to like a wedding in khakis and like a sweater, that means like I don't really care about this place that much, right? Yeah. I don't show a sanctity towards this place. It's not sanctifiable to me. And that's why, like, you go to the masjid and cat shows up in his pajamas, and people get upset that, like, you cringe because of that. It just means you don't really care about this place that much. It doesn't mean much to you. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean much to you because you don't really care about, right? But this idea of just it being the standard of, like, I think what you're hitting, like, this is the bare minimum. Like, this is not some, like, profound, like, sort of a profound societal statement we're making. This is a bare minimum. Like, if you're going to address a people, like today, like when you go to do a kitab of a nikah, You just wear something that is, because you're one, you have to express to the people you're officiating that wedding to, or if you're just attending, that you mean enough to me that I'm gonna like, I'm honored to be here, right? And there are two interesting hadith. There's one where the Prophet says, "An-nadafa min al-iman," being well kept is part of faith. But there's another hadith that says, "Al-badadatul min al-iman," being unkept is part of faith. Being disheveled is part of faith, right? So like, how do you reconcile these two things? Well, the ulama say that an-nadafa, to be well kept, is speaking in that hadith was when the Prophet ﷺ was speaking to Ahl al-Madinah and Ahl al-Makkah, people that are in urban cosmopolitan cities, that you have to be well groomed. But when he said to be disheveled or sort of unkept or sort of not aware of the way you are dressed, he was speaking to the Bedouins. So if I was to go to Mauritania or to a place in American Bedouin places that are in like, ranch country, and I was to wear this, it would probably not be the most tasteful thing for me to do, right?
Yeah, right.
It would not be a tasteful thing for me to do at that place. Is that you would wear like when I'm there, I wear a dara. I wear a dara when I'm there, because that is just good adab with people that are Bedouin. You don't want to come in like, if you come in with Ferragamos, man, and you're going to a place, whatever. It's like, what are you trying to say? You know what I mean? To a place like that.
You'll probably lose them too.
You'll lose them 100%. They'll be like, this is that, that guy. But when you're in an urban setting, and we are an urban religion, I think at some point we are an urban religion. We're a cosmopolitan religion. That there is an approach that I think Muslims generally have a sense of being people that present themselves. And by the way, it's not like a Muslim thing. I know I'm saying like Muslim, but I'm speaking from an Islamic point of perspective right now. Is that they're known to dress impeccably when they're at the place. That they are the standard of cleanliness. That they're the standard of good conduct. They're the standard of, and this does not mean that you spend ridiculous amounts of money for this. And you and I know, Maheen, that money does not buy taste. It does not. It does not. Just because it's the most expensive thing, it doesn't mean it's the most tasteful thing, right? And this is also a conversation like the importance of vintage shopping, or it was called sort of, I think, unfortunately, thrift shopping. But it is vintage shopping because vintage shopping was a thing before. It was actually in a very American phenomenon. In normal, people did buy vintage clothing because of how everything was. I'll give you an example. Belt holes, belt loops. You have belt loops.
Yep.
People never had belt loops before. Because all the pants that people would wear, like pre-depression to post-depression in America, would be specifically for them. That you never needed a belt loop. The belt, your pants would fit. You never needed to tighten your pants. What happens is once mass production comes into play, then you start seeing like belt loops. And this idea of mass production is a very problematic thing, of things in bulk, things in mass, having too many things, right? Like, quality will always be quantity. Like, you don't need this many things. But you need things that are high quality, called a jawda aliyah, like a high quality things, right? This is a jud, a generously high quality thing, rather than something that is just like you're spending a ton of money for just to have. And I'm not getting into it, but fast fashion is a disease, right? This idea of fast fashion, now this is stupidity, to be honest with you. The amount of oppression that it has, the amount of dhulm that it comes from, like just not being fair trade, وَيْلٍ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ, right? God talks about this in Surah Al-Mutaffifin, like the way these people, one of the things that the Prophet said, that the hour won't come until you see somebody, the man that makes his own clothes, وَيُبِيعُهَا, like he sells it, but he doesn't see the profits of what he's selling. Like the tailor generally, would sell to their customer, and you would know who made your clothes. You would have an idea of who made your clothing. Right? That there was an efficacy behind that. That there was it was considered a very venerable art. Now, yeah, people making things and they're not making any money out of it because they're making things for like H&M or something like that, right? Right? And just seasonal, just so there is a very deep like problem. There's no like I'm not gonna be sensitive about that. That's a problem and that's wrong, right? And I'm not saying you're an haram, fatwa, whatever. I'm just saying that's generally not right.
But so I think the average person doesn't even understand. Like, I know when you talk about fast fashion, I know what you're talking about. The average person, they need a shirt, they need like a button down shirt, right? They're gonna go to the mall and they'll probably walk into a Gap and look for the sale and then cop it, right?
Yeah.
Whatever. They don't. And if you tell them that, and it'll be like, why would I pay like $150 for a shirt? It's the same shirt. I can give them $20. You know, are they in some ways, because that like it's not like, so on the fast fashion angle, right? The idea, the people, the gripes I hear is that, number one, they imitate trends that are current, so they're not original. But secondly, is that the clothing itself, it'll wear out in like 6 months to a year. I actually don't like some fast fashion. Yeah, like some are like, you realize they're actual trash. Like, you know, you wash them a couple times and they're just like loose or like falling down, right? But like, if you talk about like a common place like the Gap, right? Or something you get from the mall for like $20. I've got shirts that personally that I've had for years that it might be like 4 or 5 years, 6 years, then it starts peeling around the collar and then you got to get rid of it, right? But like, so how do you then justify, because I've heard the argument, because people would say, well, okay, so then in 5 years I'll buy another $20 shirt, but why would I pay this $200 $150? Because the thing is, you understand that as you talk about better craftsmanship clothing or handmade or whatever, made in the USA versus some like, you know, factory, or not the USA, but versus some like garment like factory with poor wages in like Bangladesh or like or Southeast Asia, right? You know, they're, you know, the thing of it is that like most people will be like, hey, it's $20 every 5 years. Why should it be 150? They almost feel like that's like waste. Now, they don't understand the supply chain and all that stuff, but in general, they would say, you know, $150 or $200 for a shirt, or you buy a pair of Allen Edmonds like wingtips versus a pair of like something you can get at Macy's on clearance for $40 as dress shoes. Yeah, I mean, I feel like people have this, because I don't know what it is, but they almost like feel like if you were to pay the $300 for the Allen Edmonds shoes versus the $40 whatever from, you know, JCPenney or whatever, something off the clearance rack, they almost feel like you're the one being wasteful, that you're guilty of israf, you're spending too much money.
Sure.
You know, because I feel like people have, I don't know, that isn't registering to them, and in some ways I can see why, because they probably had those $40 pair that they probably beaten to the ground. They probably had it for 10 years. So this idea that it'll fall apart and you need to buy a new $40 pair every year, they don't see that reality. They're like, well, I've had it for 5-6 years. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, so this is not an indictment on anybody. I go to the Gap. Like, I don't like you know, there's not even an accusation on the Gap or anything. This is not a problem. Like, I'm not saying it's a problem. I'm just saying this is the reality that we're divorced from the process of the things that we consume.
Right.
That's the reality. I'm not saying like, look, like to buy bespoke things is an elitist thing. Like even speaking about it is almost degradational to speak about it reverentially.
Right.
Right. Like as if everybody has access to this, and it's like the top 1% do, you know, like a custom buying, like things like that, like, and I'm not, and you know me, I don't come from that background where like, you know what I'm talking about? Like, you know me, bro.
Right.
You know, I'm not talking, but you know me. Like, we don't come from the back. It's the idea of just being very aware of what is happening in the world. And number two is being, I think, mindful of the fact that it's just like clothing and presentability and tastefulness is an incredibly important part of the human condition. It always has been, right? Like good attire has been something like when the Prophet ﷺ noticed Sayyidina Umar wearing a nice garment, and he sort of felt, when you buy something nice, and you buy a nice watch, whatever, you buy something, and you almost feel guilty because it's nice. Do you know what I'm talking about? That you make, hey, no, you don't get it, bro, it was on sale. You know what I mean? Actually,
Right.
you almost sort of make excuses for it. So before he can make an excuse, the Prophet tells him, Ya Umar, ilbas jadid wa ilbas jadidan wa aish hamidan wa amit shahidan. Like, wear nice clothes, live a praiseworthy life, and die in a state of witnessing, and die as a shaheed. So, like, that is this idea of immaculateness, the idea of something that is muzayyin, right? That كَذَلِكَ يُزَيِّنُ الْإِيمَانِ, like that's the way Allah beautified iman for people in their hearts, right? Like that there was an idea of giving believers dignity. And I think if you're looking at what Islam generally did communally, is that it went to a people that were perceived to be undignified, and it empowered them to be dignified people in what they considered to be dignified, if that makes sense, right? If that makes sense.
Right.
So even if you see somebody like Omar Mukhtar, who passes away, if you look at pictures of him, he looks beautiful. He looks beautiful. He's wearing a beautiful Algerian fez with a shawl on top of it, And then you juxtapose that with like pictures of like Malcolm X. Where can you find a picture of Malcolm without a suit and tie? How many pictures? How many are there? Not where, but how many really in the like he would always present himself with a shirt and a suit and a tie, right? That like.
But again, isn't that just the uniform of the Nation of Islam, and that's what he did, and
that could be a
he
part.
left, and it's the '60s too, right?
It's 60s.
I get what you're saying. But like, and he was very. If you read about him, he was very critical of, even if you let your tie get loose, he would be critical of that, right? He, how people like they loosen their like you'll be at a wedding and it's getting late after dessert and you like let the tie loose, right? And he would be critical of that kind of thing, right? I mean, I hear you, but like I wanted to ask you because we only got 10 minutes left before this live cuts off. But because you alluded to you make a general statement like dress well. As you noted that in that hadith. I obviously can't for guys because I'm not here to tell. I don't know how. I don't know anything about women's fashion personally, but like a lot of guys. So would they see someone like you or like Ubaydullah Evans? They would. They know what like they're like. Oh, that looks classy. That they appreciate. I think they still appreciate it as much as they might give you crap about it. They still got to admit, it's classy, right? And maybe some of it comes from insecurity that they wish they could do it. But I think that's what it is. I think a lot of guys, they don't understand. They don't know how to dress, what that means. So what advice, if someone is interested in dressing better, taking that part of his life seriously, where would they start?
Well, the first thing I think bringing up Ubaydullah Evans is great. Because one of the things I think he was one of the first people, I think he was in Egypt at the time. I left during his senior year, after his senior year at Azhar. So he was like 29, 30 years old or something like that. And that's when I met him, but I think he was like giving a class. And I think it was the first time I saw somebody that presented Islam and spoke about Islam intellectually and from a heart level, but looked so elegant doing it, that there was almost this idea of like, let prestige come with scholarship. Let there be prestige that comes with scholarship, and the prestige of the way you carry yourself. That's one of the first things that, so I think that's a very important point, I think, about let prestige come with this package. It's okay with, like, that's all right. And when it comes to where do people really start, I think you have to know yourself, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, but don't imitate, like, you have to, man arafa nafsa qad arafa rabbah, whoever knows themselves knows their Lord, that you should know yourself. You know, you should know yourself, and you should know what's
Hmm.
comfortable for you. Don't try to be somebody else,
Right.
right? Don't try to be somebody else. You don't need to get the same haircut somebody gets. You need to feel very comfortable in your own body and in your clothing,
Right.
and you should do so from a place of like of of complete, without any pretenses, right? Without any pretenses. And that means that no, like, you're like, have a catalog of clothing that fits your build in your body and your skin type, and as well as the way you feel inside. It should protect. You know, Muhammad Asad, he has a book called Road to Mecca, and he talks about Islamic architecture in the book.
Hmm.
And he goes and he talks about one of the interesting things about these cities like Tunisia and Fez and Baghdad and stuff. And if you go to these old cities, all the homes look the same. It's just all of them look the same from the outward. And almost like you gotta go through this alley and there's a tiny door. And you open the door with seemingly shack, right? This thing looks like a shack, but you open the door and then you come in and it looks like paradise, right?
Right.
It's a beautiful home. That Muslims had these beautiful homes inside, and the outside it would look sort of adi. But he says that Muslims generally build homes and build their spaces and their abodes that reflected the state of their heart. That as a, you know what I mean? So the outside was very unnoticeable at times, but their hearts were beautiful. And the inward was beautified. The inward was a paradise, and the outward was material, right? Like the soul is eternal, and the body is temporal. And
Right.
I know this is a little too esoteric for this conversation of just talking about like where do you wear clothes, but you know there is a idea of recognizing that, you know, your body, your soul is eternal. So let that temporal thing that is carrying your soul in this world be something that is dignified enough to carry that eternal soul, right?
Right. Okay.
So know
So,
yourself.
so yeah, you talked about like, yeah, people talk about like, your skin color, your build, and all that. It's no secret that a lot of times, like, so I think in the East, you could be a little bit more like, amongst Muslim guys in general, some of us are carrying around spare tires, if you know what I mean.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
In the East, a thobe, a jalabiya you could rock that, and it's not going to be, it's conducive to that. It's comfortable.
Yeah.
But in America, but if you dressing it in like the more American context or the British context or like Western wear, I think it's not as it doesn't look as good on people. And I think because of their physical fitness, and not this is not a physical fitness thing, but I think
But it's important.
someone,
It's
but
important.
someone you are someone who takes their physical fitness seriously, and I think that's what. And Ubaidullah told me this too. He's like, Maheen, my suits and jackets aren't bespoke. I got a bespoke body because I run 5 miles in the morning. What he say? You know what I'm saying? and he would tell me that. And one thing you learn is you can find a pair of pants that fit you. You got to get stuff altered. You don't have to pay bespoke, but you can go to the like there's a Korean lady who has a shop down the street from me. It's like $10 to hem some pair of pants. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Because
right.
you think you'll try to fit in something, and then it's like you don't alter it. And altering isn't that expensive. So I think that's something too. Is like you learn is that
You'll make mistakes, yeah, and you'll have to
right.
learn that there are avenues that are just beyond. Yeah, I think I'm looking at the time too. I think there are other
Yep.
avenues, but I would say, like, yeah, you should. Some of us are bigger. It's okay. Rock a double-breasted suit. You'll look immaculate, right?
Yeah.
Rock some double.
Any final word before we got to cut off here in 50 seconds?
Oh,
You're pretty new to IG again. You revived it. So like what do you put now? Like where can people find you? All that kind of stuff.
yeah. I mean, it's obviously my handle over here. I think it's Umair Haseeb. I haven't figured out what I'm trying to do with it right now. So just be patient with me. I don't know. I'm still new to the world because I think everybody has a thing. I haven't really found my thing on IG. But I think like this conversation is talking about it really jumps into masculinity. Because we're
Yep.
men right now talking, and I think our women should also have this conversation. But it really comes into what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to have chivalry? What does it mean to have dignity? That's really what it comes down to. That's
All
it.
right. Sounds good.
So
On that
yeah.
note, I'll call you the Sartorial Shake. How about that? On that note, we're out.